I am Walter Higgins. I am 68 years old, and I built a construction supply empire out of a rusted-out flatbed truck and $140 I borrowed from my late wife's brother. 2 months ago, my daughter stood in my own dining room and told the family lawyer I was no longer fit to sign my own name. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice. I drove to the bank the next morning, and by the time she realized what I had done, there was nothing left for her to steal. Let me tell you how a woman who used to climb into my lap and beg for bedtime stories tried to have her own father declared legally dead while he was still breathing. It was a warm September evening in Spokane, Washington, the kind of dusk where the light turns the wheat-colored hills gold before the cold rolls down from the mountains. We were having dinner at my house, the one my late wife Carol picked out 31 years ago, the one with the wraparound porch she used to sit on every evening with a glass of iced tea. It was supposed to be a small celebration. My granddaughter Ava had just gotten into nursing school, and I wanted to mark the occasion the way Carol always would have a home-cooked meal, real conversation, no phones at the table. Sitting across from me were my daughter Renee, 41 years old, and her husband Craig. Renee had taken over as president of Higgins Building Supply 18 months earlier, after I stepped back and handed her the keys to the company I had spent 4 decades building from nothing. I told myself I was proud. I told myself the exhaustion in her voice on the phone every week was just the normal weight of running something big. I made excuse after excuse for the coldness that had crept into her eyes. Dinner had gone quiet and strange all evening. Craig kept checking his phone under the table. Renee barely touched her plate. When Ava mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that she'd need help covering her nursing textbooks that semester, I reached for my wallet without a second thought. It was second nature to me. I had spent my whole life making sure the people I loved never had to worry about money the way Carol and I once did, back when we were stacking lumber in a leaking barn and eating beans out of a can 4 nights a week. "I'll cover it," I said, pulling out my checkbook. "Textbooks, supplies, whatever she needs. Consider it done." Renee's fork clattered against her plate. "Dad, we need to talk about the checkbook." I looked up, confused. "What about it?" "You've written 6 checks this year that nobody approved. $40,000 to the fire department fundraiser, $25,000 to that veterans shelter downtown. You're just giving our money away, and none of us have any say in it." Our money. The 2 words landed in my chest like a dropped anvil. I had heard that phrase before, years ago, from a business partner who tried to squeeze me out of my first warehouse lease. I never thought I would hear it from my own daughter, sitting at my own table, eating food I had paid for. "It's my money, Renee," I said quietly. "I built this company before you were old enough to walk." Craig set down his glass with a hard, deliberate click against the wood. "With respect, Walter, a lot of people are starting to notice you're not thinking as clearly as you used to. The donations, forgetting the board meeting last month. It's concerning." I stared at him. I had missed 1 meeting. One, because I was at Ava's graduation ceremony, a fact both of them knew perfectly well. But I said nothing. I have negotiated with men far more dangerous than my son-in-law, and I have learned that the man who speaks first in an ambush is usually the man who dies first. Renee reached across the table and rested her hand on mine, her face arranging itself into something meant to look like tenderness. "Dad, we just love you. We're worried about you living alone in this big house since Mom passed. We think it might be time to talk to someone, a specialist, just to make sure everything's okay." I looked at my daughter's hand on top of mine and felt something inside my chest go cold and still, like a lake freezing over in November. I did not know it yet, but I was looking at the opening move of a war. I said goodnight early. I told them I was tired. I was not tired. I sat alone on Carol's porch until 2 in the morning, staring at the dark hills, replaying every strange phone call, every hushed conversation that stopped the second I walked into a room, every time Renee had asked, almost too casually, whether I'd thought about updating my estate paperwork. The next morning, everything came apart at once. I drove to the hardware store to pick up a part for the tractor, the same errand I'd run 100 times. My card was declined. I assumed it was a glitch and tried again. Declined a second time. I called my bank's private client line, the number I'd used for 20 years, and the woman on the other end went quiet in a way that made my stomach drop before she'd said a single word. "Mr. Higgins, I'm so sorry. Your accounts were placed under a court-ordered guardianship review yesterday afternoon. I'm not permitted to release funds without authorization from the court-appointed conservator. Who is the conservator? There was a pause. Renee Higgins Dalton, sir. I stood in the parking lot of the hardware store, with the phone pressed to my ear. The late summer sun beating down on the back of my neck, and I understood with total clarity that my own daughter had walked into a courtroom and convinced a judge that her father, a man who had never missed a single mortgage payment or forgotten a single employee's birthday in 40 years, was no longer capable of managing his own life. I did not scream in that parking lot. I got in my truck, gripped the wheel until my knuckles went white, and I drove straight to Higgins Building Supply, the company that still had my name stenciled across the front office window in gold paint. My badge didn't work on the side door. I walked around to the main entrance instead, nodded at the receptionist, a young woman named Priya who had worked the front desk for 6 years and always saved me a cup of coffee, and I walked straight past her toward my old office at the back of the building. She called after me, uneasy, but I kept walking. A man does not need permission to walk through the halls of the company he built with his own 2 hands. The door to my old office was shut. Through the frosted glass, I could see Craig sitting behind what used to be my desk, feet up on the corner of it, laughing on the phone. I did not open the door. I stood there a moment, absorbing the sight of him lounging in my chair like a man who had already won, and then I turned and walked back out through the lobby before anyone could stop me. I drove 20 minutes outside town to Gary Whitfield's place, a rundown machine shop on a gravel lot that hadn't changed since 1994. Gary had been my lawyer for 3 decades before he retired to rebuild old tractors and ignore his phone. He looked up from an engine block when I pulled in, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and took one look at my face. "You look like a man whose kid just tried to bury him alive," Gary said. I told him everything. The dinner, the frozen accounts, the conservatorship, the way Craig sat in my chair like he already owned it. Gary listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with every sentence, and when I finished, he shook his head slowly. "A conservatorship doesn't happen overnight, Walter. Courts don't hand that kind of power over without a doctor's evaluation. Somebody had to submit medical paperwork claiming you're incapacitated. That takes weeks of planning, and it takes a doctor willing to lie." "Then help me find him," I said. Gary didn't have a computer at the shop, so we drove into town to the public library, where he pulled county court records on his laptop with the patience of a man defusing a bomb. It took him almost 2 hours, working through databases most people don't know exist, before he found the filing. The petition had been submitted by Renee 6 weeks earlier. The supporting medical evaluation was signed by a doctor, Alan Kowalczyk, a name I had never heard in my life, from a clinic 2 counties over I'd never once visited. "Walter," Gary said, staring at the screen, "this evaluation says you've shown significant cognitive decline for over a year. Memory lapses, disorientation, impaired judgment regarding finances. It's detailed. It's specific. And it's a complete fabrication, because I've had lunch with you every single month for the last 3 years and you remember what I ordered better than I do." I sat in the hard library chair and felt the floor tilt slightly beneath me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Renee panicking out of concern. This was a plan, built brick by brick over months, designed to erase me from my own life while I was still standing in it. "There's more," Gary said, his voice dropping. "I want to check something else." He pulled up the county property records next, typing in the address of my house. The house Carol and I had raised our daughter in, the house where I still kept her reading glasses on the nightstand because I couldn't bring myself to move them. The deed populated on the screen, and Gary went very still. "Walter, the house isn't in your name anymore. It was transferred to Renee and Craig 11 days ago." I leaned over and read it myself, twice, because I needed my own eyes to confirm what my ears had already understood. My signature was on the transfer. A signature I never wrote, forged so cleanly that at a glance it could have fooled me. I did not go home that night. I could not risk it. If I walked back through that front door, they could call the sheriff and have me removed for trespassing in a house that, on paper, no longer belonged to me. I checked into a motel off the highway under cash, and I lay on top of the covers staring at the water-stained ceiling, my mind working the way it used to work 30 years ago when a supplier tried to undercut me out of a contract. Rage is useless. Rage tells your enemy exactly where you're standing. What I needed was proof, and I needed it quietly. I thought about the one thing Renee and Craig had both forgotten in their arrogance. They thought I was an old man who barely understood a smartphone, let alone the internal systems of the business I had built from the ground up 30 years before either of them could tie their own shoes. When I sold my controlling stake to Renee, I hadn't sold everything. Buried in the original partnership agreement, drafted back in 1994 by a young, paranoid version of Gary Whitfield, who insisted every founder protect himself against exactly this kind of betrayal, was a single clause neither of them had ever bothered to read: a founder's override. If the sitting president of the company was found to have engaged in fraud against the business or its founder, full operational control reverted automatically to me, no board vote required. I had forgotten it existed for 20 years. I remembered it now like a lifeline thrown into dark water, but a forgotten legal clause meant nothing without proof of fraud. I needed to know exactly what Renee and Craig were doing, and I needed to hear it in their own words. I called an old friend, Ruth Alvarez, a private investigator I'd hired years ago to look into a supplier skimming inventory. Ruth met me in the back booth of a truck stop diner outside city limits, the kind of place where nobody asks your name. I handed her cash and asked for one thing: a small audio device, battery-powered, something I could plant without anyone noticing. That night, long after midnight, I drove back to the office in my old truck, the same green, 1987 Ford I'd bought with the very first profits the business ever made. I still had a key to the side loading dock, a door installed decades before anyone thought to modernize the security system, hidden behind a row of dumpsters. Craig's expensive new cameras never quite covered. I slipped through the dark warehouse, past the stacked pallets of lumber and drywall, up the back stairwell, and into the executive hallway I had walked 10,000 times before. My old office door was unlocked. Inside, Craig had replaced my scarred oak desk with a glass and chrome monstrosity that looked like it belonged in a magazine, not a lumberyard. On the corner of it sat a small brass desk clock, a gift I had given Renee the day she was promoted to president, meant to remind her that time and legacy mattered more than money ever would. It was almost too painful, using that same clock now as the instrument of her downfall. I opened the back panel with a small screwdriver, wired Ruth's tiny transmitter into the clock's internal battery pack, and sealed it shut again, careful to leave no trace of my visit. For the next 4 days, I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a diner across the street, a small earpiece tucked into my ear, listening to the low hum of my old office. I heard vendor calls. I heard Craig complaining about a shipment delay. And on the third night, just after the office had gone quiet and everyone else had left the building, I heard the door open and Renee's voice, sharp and rushed. "Did Kowalczyk's paperwork clear the second hearing?" "Yeah," Craig said. "Cost us another 15 grand to keep him quiet, but the judge signed off. It's permanent now. Full conservatorship." "Good, because once we sell off the equipment yard and the warehouse lease, we're looking at almost 9 million liquid. We move it into the offshore account before he figures out what's happening, and by the time anyone starts asking questions, we're in Portugal." I sat frozen in the cab of my truck, my hands locked around the steering wheel, listening to my daughter calmly discuss selling off the machinery that fed 40 families, discussing the theft of $9 million like she was reading a grocery list. And then I heard the sentence that turned my blood to ice water. "What about the assisted living placement?" Renee asked. "Sunrise Meadows has a bed open Monday morning," Craig said. "Memory care wing. Once he's in there, nobody's going to believe a word he says. Staff will just chart it as confusion. He'll be a ghost. Monday morning, 3 days away." My own daughter had arranged to have me committed to a memory care facility. Not because I was sick, but because a healthy man cannot be robbed without eventually fighting back, and a man labeled demented can be dismissed with a shrug. I drove straight to Gary's shop that same night and played him the recording. He sat in silence, arms crossed, his face growing grimmer with every word. When it ended, he looked at me and said quietly, "Walter, this isn't just fraud anymore. This is elder abuse, forged documents, medical fraud. And now they're about to move $9 million out of the country. We need to move fast, and we need to move exactly right." For the next 2 days, Gary and I worked through the night, We pulled the original 1994 partnership agreement and confirmed the founder's override clause was airtight, exactly as I remembered it. We drafted the legal declaration to invoke it. We set up a new, ironclad asset protection trust in Nevada, choosing that state specifically because its laws made assets inside nearly impossible to seize, freeze, or challenge in court. We prepared everything so that when I finally moved, I would move once, and it would be over. Sunday night, at 11:50, I sat at Gary's kitchen table, with his old laptop open in front of me, and my hand resting on the keys. I thought about Carol, about the nights we slept in the back of that flatbed truck because we couldn't afford a motel room. I thought about every callus, every frozen morning loading lumber before sunrise, every sacrifice that built the empire my daughter was trying to drain and abandon like an empty shell. I did not feel rage anymore. I felt something colder and steadier than rage. I felt certainty. I logged into the founder's override portal using the biometric access code Gary had helped me restore, and the system recognized me instantly, exactly as it was designed 28 years earlier. I found the pending offshore wire, a transfer of $8,900,000 scheduled to execute at 8 the next morning. I canceled it with a single keystroke. I found Renee and Craig's joint personal account, fattened over the last year with money quietly skimmed from company vendor contracts, $600,000 sitting there like it belonged to them. I moved every cent of it, combined with the frozen wire, into the new trust, locked permanently beyond their reach, reserved for the employees whose jobs they had been about to destroy, and for Ava's education, the granddaughter who had never asked me for anything but help with textbooks. Then I compiled everything: the forged deed, the fraudulent medical evaluation, the recording of Craig and Renee discussing the fake diagnosis, the assisted living placement, the offshore transfer. I packaged it all and sent it, without my name attached, to the county district attorney's office and the state attorney general's elder fraud unit. I did not go home. That house belonged to Renee now, on paper. But paper is a coward's kind of ownership. I drove to my house one final time before sunrise, using the spare key hidden under the porch step Carol and I had used for 30 years, and I walked through the quiet rooms one last time. I took Carol's reading glasses off the nightstand and slid them into my coat pocket. I took nothing else. In the kitchen, I set the forged deed and the fraudulent medical file side by side on the counter, and beside them I left a single handwritten note. "You forgot who taught you how to read a contract." I walked out the front door as the sky over the hills began to turn pale gray, climbed into my old truck, and drove. I was 2 hours south, the morning sun breaking gold over the highway, when a cheap prepaid phone I'd bought the day before rang on the passenger seat. I picked it up and said nothing. "Dad." Renee's voice cracked, hollow and small in a way I had never once heard in 41 years. "The transfer failed. Our account is empty. There are 2 detectives at the office right now with a warrant. Dad, please, you have to tell them this is a mistake." I looked out at the wide, open road ahead of me, gold light spilling across the asphalt, and I felt nothing but a quiet, settled peace. "You told the judge I couldn't manage my own affairs," I said. "So I stopped managing them for you instead." I ended the call, rolled down the window, and dropped the phone onto the gravel shoulder without looking back. I built that company with my hands and my back and 30 years of my life, and I will not apologize for protecting it, or myself, from the 2 people who decided my love was a resource to be harvested instead of a gift to be honored. If there is a lesson in any of this, it's a simple one. Love your children with your whole heart, but never hand anyone, blood or otherwise, the power to erase you. A legacy isn't the money you leave behind, it's the dignity you refuse to surrender. Tell me, from wherever you're listening tonight, if your own child looked you in the eye and tried to lock you away for what you built, what would you have done?